Taiwan's leading opposition candidates could be one step closer to joining forces for next year's election after a secret meeting in Taipei. More than 40 Chinese warplanes spotted near Taiwan. We find out why. Dozens of civilians are dead after an Israeli strike targeted Gaza's largest refugee camp. Plus, we celebrate the achievements of one of Taiwan's most renowned astronomers as he says goodbye to the profession. Welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Liao with 30 minutes of the latest. Thanks for joining us. With Taiwan's presidential elections just weeks away, talks of an opposition joint ticket is intensifying. The country's leading opposition candidates have held a secret meeting to discuss joining forces for January's race. Stash Butler reports.
A secret meeting in Taipei captured by local media between two opposition presidential candidates, fueling rumors they'd finally reached a deal to form a historic joint ticket for Taiwan's January election. The candidates, former Taipei Mayor Ke Wen-je of the Taiwan People's Party and the Kuomintang's Hou You-yi, are second and third in the polls. To join forces, one of them would need to step back and take the vice presidential spot. But hours later, word from both parties. No deal yet on who'll give way. Despite the challenges, earlier this week, Ke and Hou's parties agreed to work together on legislative races, suggesting that a merger for the presidential campaign, aimed at bringing down the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, might not be too far off.
民进党会搞到今天台湾超过60% 以上的民意希望政党轮替，当然是他做太差嘛，对不对？那也因为这个民意，你知道所以我们有才会考虑说，那这个战略目标如果是要达有没有可能政党合作去达到政党轮替的这个目标嘛
Though dissatisfaction with his party is high, DPP candidate and current Vice President Lai Ching-te is still leading in the polls. To shore up support, he's hinted for the first time he could choose Taiwan's influential envoy to the US, Xiaobi Kim, to be his running mate.
大概社会讨论最多是萧美琴嘛，
是，
还有郑丽君嘛，
是，
另外呢还有科技界人士，还有另外其他领域像文化界的人，其实都有人推荐。
萧美琴小姐应该也是在优先名单的优先之上。
呀，你可以这样讲。
For months, Lai's campaign has benefited from a divided opposition. But if his rivals decide now to unite, even a popular VP pick may not be enough to help Taiwan's second-in-command win the country's top job. Andy Xue and Stash Butler for TaiwanPlus.
Foxconn founder Terry Gou says he's gathered the signatures needed to run as an independent in Taiwan's presidential election next year. Our reporter Ed Moon was on the scene in Taipei as he delivered the forms to be counted.
We have just seen the billionaire founder of Foxconn, Terry Gou, go into this building to deliver the almost 300,000 signatures needed to run as a presidential candidate in Taiwan's January presidential election.
今天呢是一个非常重要的日子，台湾人民追求民主自由的心声。
It's the latest step on what has been a long journey for Gou. He originally wanted to run as the opposition Kuomintang candidate, but when they picked someone else, he decided to go it alone. The signature drive hasn't been plain sailing either, with numerous allegations of signature buying, and 2 weeks ago, a surprise announcement from China that it was opening an investigation into Foxconn. Now Gou no longer has any formal positions in the company, but Foxconn has deep roots in China. That's where it makes Apple's iPhones and many other electronics. Gou is seen as being a very friendly figure towards China due to these business links, and he has called repeatedly for peace talks and more economic exchanges with China. Beijing opening the investigation at this time has been seen as a signal by some that China's ruling Communist Party wants Gou to withdraw from the race. But for now, he's continuing on. It's up to the Central Election Commission and authorities here to check and see if he's gathered all of the necessary signatures. If so, he'll be able to register as a candidate at the end of this month.
每一份联署书对我都是一份责任，每一份联署书对我都是一份鞭策。
Whether he'll do so is another matter. There's still talks ongoing between other opposition candidates about forming a joint ticket. and Gou himself has said he'd like to unite the opposition. Passing the signature threshold will give him a stronger hand in any talks, but just a few months out from voting day, it's still unclear how this race will shape up. Justin Wu, Sam Hui, and Ed Moon in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan should work with other countries to counter Chinese interference in upcoming elections. That's according to the head of the National Security Bureau, Taiwan's intelligence agency. Tsai Ming-yen warned of China's gray zone warfare tactics in the run-up to presidential and legislative elections in January. He said these tactics include military intimidation, diplomatic and economic attacks, and cyber and cognitive warfare. Tsai said working with other countries would give a clearer picture of the threat China poses. To learn more about the ways China seeks to influence Taiwan's elections, reporter Rick Glauert spoke to political science professor Chen Fangyu of Soochow University in Taipei.
So we've been hearing a lot of warnings about Chinese interference in Taiwan's upcoming elections. Could you just tell us what Beijing might be hoping to achieve by interfering in the elections?
Well, it's very clear that Beijing has a political agenda of pushing for unification. Therefore, they have systematically pushing for more pro-China policies and pro-China candidates. That is first. But also, we also have to notice that Beijing's cognitive warfare or other kinds of interference in Taiwan is not only for the election itself, but also they want to spread for the distrust for the democratic systems overall. It's just like Russians to do with the US and for other democratic countries.
And what does Chinese meddling in these elections look like? What tools do they use to interfere?
Well, China's interference is increasing but also evolving. So first of all, they have a kind of various tools for propaganda. Like they will use the social media, they will use the app like TikTok and other apps to spread out for the positive image of China. They also use a lot of cognitive warfare on the social media. For example, they pretend they are not political. For example, they use a lot of social groups on the mountains, the local communities, the movies, and the food. But when the election is approaching, they will spread a lot of political information to influence people's perception. So they have a lot of different kinds of tools.
Could you outline exactly what is at risk for Taiwan as it comes up to the presidential and parliamentary elections?
I think the most important thing is that the cognitive warfare and also the informational warfare wants to spread this distrust and chaotic public spheres among people. So that will they will spread a lot of disinformation, and also they want to spur a lot of emotional reactions to a lot of public events. Therefore, people cannot have very high quality discussion about the public policy. And then, therefore, we cannot have a very good discussion or evaluations on the political parties or the politicians. That will hurt the so-called responsibility and accountability in democracies. So we have to discern what is true or false on the information. And also we want to notice that there are a lot of different emotional reactions there, and we have to be very careful about that.
Taiwan has reported 43 Chinese military aircraft and 7 Navy ships operating around the country in the past 24 hours. The country's military says China was conducting joint combat patrols and used a combination of different aircraft. Of the group of planes, 37 breached Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ, which is an area used for defensive purposes but is not part of the country's territory. More than 24 fighter jets took part in the exercises alongside aerial refueling planes. This means China was practicing how to refuel its jets mid-flight and keep them in the air longer. For more on what China's recent incursion into Taiwan's ADIZ means, our reporter Jaime Okan spoke to Ben Lewis, an independent defense analyst who monitors military activity around Taiwan.
Last time we saw China sail an aircraft carrier into the Western Pacific, we saw some of the largest unannounced exercise that China's ever conducted. Are we seeing something similar with today's incursions?
Seems to be they're practicing a similar type of operation that they were in early September. Basically, what the PLA is attempting to practice is making sure that their planes can, one, reach the area where they need to be in the Western Pacific, and two, ensure that they can stay up in the air for longer. So these aerial tankers fly around, airplanes fly up behind them, refuel in midair, and that extends their ability to stay in the air for much longer, and it induces longer-term operations in the air.
And why is China operating in this area? And are we going to see more of these types of exercises?
I think it's definitely possible we'll be seeing more of these kinds of drills in the future. I was personally surprised that we had one last month, and now they're doing it again. The Western Pacific is an area where the PLAN doesn't have as much experience, and they're trying to get some because they need to. The PLA is anticipating an intervention in a Taiwan contingency by the United States. That intervention is going to be approaching from the Western Pacific, among other places. So they need to make sure they can get out there and do what they need to do, and they have a long way to go before they can.
That was Ben Lewis, a defense analyst in Washington, D.C., speaking with our reporter Jaime Ocon. Coming up after the break, the push to unionize is gaining traction among public employees in Taiwan as they call for better treatment in the workplace.
At Connected, we believe in the power of dialogue. It's not just about the headlines, it's about finding common ground. Join the conversation.
Connected with Divya Gopalan on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back after that quick break. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Over 50 civilians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on Gaza's largest refugee camp. Israel says it was targeting a senior Hamas member in the area. Israel has been bombing Hamas targets continuously for 4 weeks since Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel on October 7th. Rosie Greninger has the story.
Rescuers dig through the rubble, searching for survivors of an Israeli bombing on Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp. The nearby hospital is swamped with hundreds of civilians wounded in the strike, and outside its walls are lined with body bags. This site, now a crater in the ground, housed hundreds of displaced Palestinians. They had sought refuge here as Israeli forces launched their offensive on Hamas. The assault on the militant group that rules Gaza is in its 4th week, a response to Hamas carrying out a surprise attack on Israel, killing over 1,400 people and taking more than 200 hostages. Gaza's health ministry says 50 people were killed at the refugee camp and over 150 people injured. The Israeli Defense Forces says it was targeting a Hamas stronghold and killed Commander Ibrahim Biari and other Hamas targets.
חיסלנו הערב את המחבל המרצח איברהים ביארי. ביארי הוא מוביל הלחימה המרכזי בצפון הרצועה מאז כניסת כוחות צה"ל לעזה. יש לו גם חלק בטבח ב-7 באוקטובר.
But Hamas denied these claims on Al Arabiya TV, accusing the IDF of what it described as false and unfounded talk intended to justify its heinous crime. Gaza is facing a humanitarian crisis, and calls for a ceasefire are intensifying from multiple United Nations bodies.
Civilians have borne the brunt of the current fighting from the outset. Protection of civilians on both sides is paramount and must be respected at all times.
The World Health Organization says a public health catastrophe is imminent in the enclave as people suffer with a lack of food, water, health supplies and fuel, as aid deliveries are limited by a blockade by Israel. Since the outbreak of the recent conflict, over 8,500 people have reportedly been killed in Gaza. Despite calls for a ceasefire, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ruled out a pause in the fighting.
Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
Israel is continuing to batter Gaza with hundreds of airstrikes, and on the ground, forces are moving deeper into the strip, targeting Hamas militants and attempting to free the hostages taken on October 7. But as the war rages on, civilians in Gaza are running out of places they can turn for safety and shelter, as it seems anywhere on the strip could be a target. Eason Pan and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Bolivia has severed diplomatic ties with Israel over its offensive in Gaza. Chile and Colombia also announced on social media that they are recalling their ambassadors to Israel, citing what they call the massacre of Palestinians. Brazilian President Lula da Silva last week criticized Israel's offensive and joined Mexico in calling for a ceasefire. All 5 countries officially recognized the state of Palestine. Retaliatory strikes by Israel's military have killed over 8,500 people in Gaza since the militant group Hamas attacked Israel in early October. Hamas killed over 1,400 people in Israel and is holding 200 people hostage. At least 48 people are dead and dozens still missing after Hurricane Otis hit Mexico. The record-breaking storm swept through the tourist resort of Acapulco in the country's Pacific coast in late October. The devastation caused power outages, flooding, and severe damage to buildings. It left many locals without food and water. Supplies are now being taken to the area. A push by public employees to unionize is spreading and getting more political. John Van Trieste reports.
Taiwan's government workers say they've had enough. From firefighters to the police, and now legal clerks, they all want one thing: the right to form unions. Taiwan's law doesn't allow public employees to organize. But with an election just months away, there are fresh signs the push for unions is gaining political traction. It was the firefighters who set off this wave of discontent. They've stepped up picketing since September, when a fire at a factory that had violated safety rules killed 4 of their comrades. They say a union is the only way to pressure the government into enforcing safety standards, stopping more preventable deaths. From there, the anger has burned through the rest of the public sector. Some police say they're burdened with work that goes beyond basic law enforcement, and workers in Taiwan's courts are often still on the clock well past midnight. They see unions as the only way to deal with these problems. So far, the government has proposed a compromise, a kind of quasi-union that's now under debate in the legislature. But this has only attracted backlash and more protest.
过高的筹组门槛，协商的次数处处受限，毫无争议权的结果。消防人员不能对消防事项协商，警察人员不能对警察事项协商。那请问这个协商权的存在意义是什么？
那如果你剥夺了我们罢工权，你裁决委员会的组成应该要更为公平啊。但问题是，协会法草案里面规定，国家可以指派3个人来做这一个就是裁决委员会的委员，那协会指派的人只能2个，那3比2。
In the final stretch before Taiwan's national elections, the country's main opposition parties have picked up the union cause. KMT presidential candidate Hou You-yi and his TPP rival Ko Wen-je have given public sector unions their blessing. Now, the union push is gaining support in Taiwan's legislature too.
人家是要组工会，结果你为了要平息这样的压力跟这样舆论的压力。 所以你提出一个协会出来说，我好理解的物件，那你是在把大家当白痴吗？
不是只有欧美国家的警消有工会，我们连我们邻近的韩国警察都可以组工会了。
But so far, only the opposition has been explicit in its support. The ruling DPP was the only major party not at a press conference backing unionization on Wednesday. A spokesperson for DPP presidential candidate Lai Ching-te, one of the 2 candidates who have not pledged to back the firefighters' demands, stopped short of supporting a union.
In the future, whether it's in terms of revising relevant regulations on public servants participating in different associations or in terms of unions, we will continue to communicate closely with firefighters as well as other representatives.
TaiwanPlus reached out to the DPP headquarters to find out what the Legislative Caucus's position is, but did not get a response. There are only around 360,000 government employees in Taiwan, a small fraction of the country's 23 million people. But with their cause in the spotlight and the issue becoming increasingly partisan, they could help sway the outcome of next year's election. Chris Ma and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan is looking to attract more foreign talent as it grapples with a labor shortage. The government recently opened a new service center to help recruit more people from overseas and help them get used to life in Taiwan. I take a look at some of the most pressing challenges people face when they move here. Taiwan needs more workers. The government wants to attract nearly 500,000 foreign workers over the next decade to fill in labor gaps left by low birth rates and a shrinking population.
到2030年，就未来10年，当时来讲的话，我们到底需要多少的国际人才来补足我们这个人才上的缺口？40万人。
To help bring more people to the country, the government recently launched Talent Taiwan, a service center tasked with recruiting foreign professionals. The center is an offshoot of Taiwan's Employment Gold Card Visa Scheme, a program that allows people to move to the country without being tied to an employer. Talent Taiwan is also supposed to help overseas workers get used to living in the country. That's because there are still many obstacles for foreigners who come and live here.
Aside from giving you the card, once you exit the airport, you're more or less on your own when it comes to finding where do you want to live, where do your kids want to go to school, when it comes to finding many things, especially if you've lived most of your life overseas.
Taiwan's Gold Card office surveyed 1,000 Gold Card holders last year and found that 48% of respondents had negative experiences with Taiwan's banking system. It was the top reported problem.
What I have been hearing is the issue of banking, which every foreigner keeps talking about, that perhaps Taiwan banking need to be updated and modernized.
I went to like 5 banks when I wanted to open a bank account. The first 4 I struck out.
Even the Gold Card office's website admits that banking is an obstacle for foreign nationals. It says that people should mentally prepare and expect to spend half a day opening an account. The second most reported problem for people new to Taiwan is the language barrier. 45% of respondents said the local Mandarin Chinese language gave them problems, and that could complicate troubles at the bank.
A lot of times it comes down to tellers not wanting to serve foreigners for fear of being, having to speak English, any miscommunication, so they kind of push it away and they don't want to deal with it.
But language issues go beyond banking. They may pose challenges for those coming to Taiwan with families.
Especially for my wife, who, she has Mandarin, Taiwan roots, but her Mandarin is not native. And she has to deal with the school system, right? She has to deal with, these class line groups where there are 20 messages, 100 messages a day, all in Mandarin.
The banking system and the local language are just 2 of about 36 problems identified in the survey. But they're well-established Taiwanese institutions, so Talent Taiwan has its work cut out for it if it's going to make them more accommodating for new arrivals. World-renowned astronomers and astrophysicists are in Taipei to celebrate the work of Dr. Paul Ho, a pioneer in developing the field of astronomy in Asia. Our reporter Joyce Zeng spoke to Dr. Ho and the scientists who've been pushing the scientific frontier out into the universe.
Explaining the skies is something Dr. Paul Ho never gets tired of. A renowned astronomer, he's spent his life looking beyond what the naked eye can see. Now, after 45 years of groundbreaking work with some of the world's finest observatories, Ho is retiring, reflecting on his journey exploring the vast expanse of the universe and those who've inspired him.
Brightest people are not motivated by money. They are motivated by doing things that are important and doing things in the frontier.
Born in Hong Kong, Ho said he remembers shooting rockets off the balcony with his brother, curious to know how far they'd go. At age 10, his family moved to the United States, where Ho eventually studied physics at MIT and later pursued astronomy, teaching it at Harvard. But realizing the opportunities to drive the field in Asia, Ho came to Taiwan to explore the universe from a new perspective.
Asia, technology-wise, have always followed the West, right? In the sense that the West has always been ahead in developing all the technology. But in the last 50 years, I would say, people begin to build things in Asia.
Among the things Ho built was a collaboration between countries in the region. He brought together experts from Japan, Korea, China, and Taiwan, and established a joint observatory in Hawaii, setting aside their country's political differences to focus on science. For 10 years, Ho was also director of the Astronomy and Astrophysics Department for Taiwan's top research institute. a team which went on to contribute to the breakthrough first image of a black hole. Ho leaves the department with one of just 4 superconducting device labs in the world. These labs are kept pristine and in absolute zero temperatures, with machines capable of achieving even higher degrees of precision than the most advanced chip makers. With Ho retiring, several elite astronomers have flown into Taipei from the US, Europe, and across Asia to celebrate his career.
The things that really struck me of Paul is that he was empowering young people to develop themselves in ways that they didn't think they could do.
He came up and organized to pour together like a black hole to pour together the regions. This takes a lot of effort, a lot of political maneuver. He succeeded.
Ho says scientists are good role models for collaboration, often figuring out how to work together before businessmen and politicians do. And that space for exchange is what he wishes for generations to come, since for Ho, true understanding begins when one can see beyond this world. Alex Chen and Joyce Zen for TaiwanPlus.
That's about it for this edition of TaiwanPlus News. Now, if you like what you saw, please consider downloading the TaiwanPlus app or visiting our website or our social media channels for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, today we leave you with images of a former military power plant on Taiwan's offshore island of Mazu, which is now transformed into an art museum. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care, and I'll see you next time.